Hello again, it's Mr. Pete, your YouTube shop teacher. Welcome back to the shop, and this is part one of a multi-part video on how to make a little cast iron, this is aluminum, a little cast iron woodworking vise that'll fit on the corner of the bench. This video is a collaboration between me and Clark Easterling, who made the castings, and you all know him from Windy Hill Foundry, and the other man is Ted Sikora, the late Ted Sikora, a good friend of mine from Wisconsin that made the original patterns for me, and we miss you, Ted. So let's get started on what it will be a very, very long video. I hope you stay with me. No one will be making this because you do not have the castings, you do not have the patterns, but I think that you might enjoy this for the pure entertainment value and all of the different operations and machine shop steps that I will be showing you. So there's some new stuff in here, I hope, so stick around. This video is dedicated to my good buddy Ted Sikora from Wisconsin, and he is the gentleman that made the blue 3D patterns for me, as well as many other patterns over the years. Ted, we miss you. And here I am at the Flywheelers in 2022 with my good buddy Clark Easterling of Windy Hill Foundry. Okay, this is what we will be making. This one's aluminum. We'll be making it out of cast iron, that is, I will be. Now this is a project that I made, or the students made, and there were hundreds of them made over the years when I taught machine shop, but actually this was made in a beginning metals class, that is sophomore, 15 and 16-year-old boys made these. They made the castings, they did the machining, and since they did not have machine shop, I shouldn't say they did the machining, they did the fabrication. Some of the parts were pre-made for them by my machine shop classes because they didn't have access yet to lathes and milling machines, so it's basically what we would call a bench metal project. The original that I copied this off of was made by Stanley, and I had these patterns mounted on a match plate, and it was a pretty successful project. I don't know if the kids cared much about it, but I think it's interesting. Notice the little cleats here that would allow it to dig into the wood workbench that it should be mounted on, as I will show you now. So here it is, clamped to the corner of a walnut bench. It has to be the left-hand corner. You can see how the screw here tightens up against the bottom of the bench, and then in and out it goes. Now this can be difficult to make, that is, if these two screws here, or the screw and the shaft, the rod here, if they aren't perfectly parallel and two planes, of course it's going to bind. So I had jigs made up for this, and I tried to make it foolproof, and most of them did work out quite nicely for the kids over the years. So these are the 3D printed plastic patterns that Ted made for me, and I gave him all of the dimensions off of this in an email, and this is what he came up with. He changed the design a little bit. I think I told him to change it. I don't remember. It's a couple of years ago already. So there's the patterns, and then they were sent down to Mississippi to Clark Easterling's Windy Hill Foundry, and he made the cast iron castings for me. And this is what I will be machining. I made a set of aluminum ones here in my own foundry. I never did machine them. Of course, Henry is my grandson. He is now 8 years old. So maybe it's dedicated to him too. I'm not really sure why he put Henry on here backwards, but that's the back side of the vise, but doesn't really matter, does it? Let me just tell you the difference here between the weights. These cast iron castings are very heavy compared to the aluminum. Let's weigh them. Using the Toledo Honest Weight Scale, let's weigh the aluminum ones, and you will see that they weigh what, 2.6 pounds? I know some of you guys want grams, but I'm giving it to you in pounds. 2.6. How much do you think the cast iron ones weigh? Yeah, 7.1. more than double the weight. As my brother's ex-girlfriend, ravishing redhead, would say, who cares how much they weigh? I hope you all watch Clark Easterling's channel entitled Windy Hill Foundry, and if you do, you know that he takes old brake rotors like this, and that is his source of cast iron for these castings that he makes. And these have been stress relieved. I don't think it would matter at all, but they have been stress relieved. Remember again that in my classes years ago, and this was in the 80s and the 70s, I think it was about 1970 that I made the original match plate for this. All of my match plates at the high school, there were probably about 50 of them for different projects, were all unceremoniously destroyed by me when my heart was broken and they closed the machine shop as well as other shops at the high school, and they did this all around the country. And it is one of the biggest tragedies that can ever be imagined that we do not teach this in the schools. I already told you that these kids were not machinists. They were strictly sophomores in a one-semester class, so we did not machine the back sides. You can see they're pretty smooth. There was no need to machine it. But the castings that Clark gave me had a riser right here, so this does have to be machined, so that'll be the first thing that I do. There is some defects here that won't matter at all, and that will not clean up. I just want to get it to be pretty flat because these will not lay flat. And on this one he's got, I don't know what that is, but again it doesn't lay flat, so that has to be machined. So that is the very first thing that I will do, and I will machine one of them on the closing lathe in a 4-jaw chuck. You don't need to see both of them because it will be a repetition. And the other thing I was going to tell you is that I believe you all know that on a cast iron casting there is what we call fire scale, as hard as can be, and if you take a real light cut it's going to probably dull the cutters, or whether it be a lathe or a milling machine. So the general thing that is done with a casting is either to rough grind it with an offhand grinder to get through that fire scale, or take a cut that is deep enough to go through the fire scale into the softer cast iron. How hard this is, I will not know until I set it up in the machine. Now, how am I going to do that? I guess I already told you, but there is no good way to hold this in a milling machine because the clamps would be in the way of machining it. You understand that? It would have to be held either in a vise, but remember all of the sides here have taper on them, pattern draft, so it's hard to hold something. Toe clamps that come in from the side and press down would be ideal. I do not have any of those, so I'm going to set this up in a 4-jaw chuck. I'm going to do a little bit of that right here on the bench because it's easier to photograph and gravity doesn't fight against me as I set it up. So let's take a look at that. Alright, here's the 8-inch 4-jaw chuck off of the closing, and I've already adjusted the jaws about where I think they ought to be because it's a very irregular casting, as you can see. Now the problem here is twofold. One is that the jaws are sticking up higher than the casting. I don't want to hit the jaws, the hardened jaws. I don't want to damage the tool. I don't want to damage the chuck. And we got a pretty big hole here, and this tends to want to get pushed into there. So I have prepared a piece of packing that's about 3/16 thick. That'll lay in there. I hope it doesn't fly out and kill me. And that does two things. It raises it up a little bit. Can you see that? And it causes this to have a good seat. So I will snug this up now just a little bit, and then the entire chuck will be mounted on the lathe, and I will face this off with carbide, and I hope that it machines semi-freely. What do you think of that setup? Do you have a better idea? How would you do it? And this, of course, has to be a fairly large chuck. And like I said, it is, I believe, yeah, it's an 8-inch 4-jaw chuck made in England. And I totally agree with you. I do not like the idea that it's off center. I do not like these chuck jaws sticking out, and you need a fairly large lathe to do this. I don't like this loose piece in here. You know, there's a lot that I don't like. And it will run out of balance a little bit, but at a slower speed it probably isn't noticeable, but I don't want the machine to walk across the floor either. I've spent about 15 minutes trying to true this up in the chuck because there were some high spots, so I had to tap it with my copper hammer, and I think I got it pretty well adjusted because the cutter now is right up against the work. I don't think it's in the frame, but spinning it around I am the same distance from the casting. I'll tighten up the jaws a little bit, make sure it hasn't moved, and finally I am ready to start cutting. But you notice this big old ball bearing center in the way, but this, at least for now, will give me the confidence that this thing isn't going to fly out and kill me. I'm 79 years old, doesn't really matter anymore, but I would dread it if I was only severely injured. Okay, this is kind of scary, I have to admit. I stand off to the side and that's why I use that center. But if you look here at my initial passes, I haven't cleaned up the corner yet, here and here, but it's not very far off. I was really in there very true. This still has to come off, and I think there's a bit of a sinkhole here in the middle, but you can kind of forget everything that I told you about that fire scale, because this is machining just beautifully, and I am using a Schar's, right here, carbide tool. I'm feeding from the center out rather than just the opposite, and it's working quite well. So this isn't going to be as difficult as what I thought, although it is scary. So I'll take a couple more passes using the center, that ball bearing center, and then I'll go in here and kill this. It's about 30 minutes later, and this is 3 or 4 cuts, and it really cleaned up nice. I did have to slow the speed down a little bit, the spindle speed, because remember the cutting speed increases greatly as you get to a larger diameter way out here. So it was glazing over a little bit. So the next thing I'm going to do off camera, I will machine this off, and then I'll take one final light pass over the whole thing, and then I'm done. Okay, it's cleaned up, too good to be true, and this is the tool that I was using. It's from Schar's, carbide. I don't know what the inserts are, but double-ended. It worked great. Now, if you have never machined cast iron, a couple things I want to tell you. First of all, you do not need oil or lubricants or anything like that, because it is self-lubricating because of the graphite content, and it is a horrible mess. That's what the chips look like. They are never long and stringy. They're always crumbly and easy to manage, but look at my hands. That is the carbon or the graphite that helps lubricate it. But it's a mess. It's a stinking mess. As a matter of fact, it's the same as if you just washed your hands with graphite. So that's what I got to do now. And the machine is a very big mess after this. So generally I vacuum this because it's so crumbly. It vacuums very, very well and does not clog the hose. Out of the chuck it comes. And I was so glad that there was no incident to report to you. Well, come on out of there. There it is. And the packing stayed in place. I was a little leery about that. And now I am ready to machine this one. But it will not be easy. In other words, it's not just going to fit in there. I'll have to fiddle with it. I'm not sure how it will be held yet. But if there's anything remarkable about this, I will show it to you. Otherwise, you won't see it at all. And when I'm done, hopefully it'll look as good as this. And these do not need to be very good in terms of machining finish, I should say, because this will all be hidden. And sometimes we put a wooden face on vice jaws that are used for woodworking, don't we? I know I said I wasn't going to show you this, but this is the setup for the other piece. And what I do is rotate the chuck with the cutter close to the work until we have pretty much equal distance all the way around, and I tap it a little bit if necessary. And you can't get it perfect because castings are not perfect. Rough castings are not perfect. Now this time I have the packing over here, which you can't see, held onto the casting with 3M double stick tape, which I will show you in a minute, and it is incredibly strong, so that isn't going to fly out. And I've got all 4 jaws tightened up. Again, I do not like this one bit sticking out. This is dangerous as heck, but it's out of balance also, is part of the problem. But this machine is heavy enough to where it can absorb that vibration without any big deal. And now I will check to see how far out of balance it is. Again, I have the center up against it so it cannot come out. And the machine is not vibrating at all. So the balance is actually pretty good, even though it doesn't look like it. Okay, that completes the cut. It took quite a while because I have to feed so slowly. Little glazing over in the corners here where I still hadn't quite got through the fire scale. And of course there was an inclusion, a slag inclusion right there. I'm not going to take that out. I would have to remove too much because it does not cause a problem at all. So let me take it out and we'll go over to the bench and take a look at it a little bit closer. And there is the packing still in place. This might be a little trick that everyone can use, and I've never done it before in my life, but here is the 3M tape, and this must be 25 years old. It's all yellow. It doesn't seem to be very sticky, but by golly, it's hard to get off. Matter of fact, look what I have to do. It's like bubble gum. I suppose I should have heated it up a little bit with a heat gun to get that off, but boy, that wasn't going anyplace, was it? That's a trick I hope I can remember. Look at my hands. Okay, that took several hours, although the video is less than a half hour long. Both of these look quite good. They're perfectly flat, better than they need to be. Now I still have some deburring to do around here, which I will do off camera at some time, probably just with a file, although right here that flashing is thick enough to where I might have to grind it off. Again, a little inclusion there, now that you can see the close-up, and how glazed it is here on the very corners for two reasons. One, that I was still going through the fire scale, and number two or three or whatever reason it is, the cutting speed changes as I get out from the middle. So at this point probably the speed was too fast and it's just glazing over, but they set perfectly flat and they are ready for the next operation, which will be in the following videos. That completes part 1 of this video. Hope you liked it. Now I might put some bonus footage at the end here, kind of a repetition, but some people like to see the chips fly off, other people can't stand it. Anyway, this is Mr. Pete saying so long for now, and I'll see you in the next part of this video, where I make, well, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I got to think about it. So long for now. Clark, if you're watching and listening down there in Mississippi, thanks for making these great castings, and they machined extremely well. So that alloy of brake rotors is just perfect for this application. And look who's lurking in the background here. Everyone's favorite, Keith Rucker of Vintage Machinery.